Hello and welcome to another conversation in practical theology with me, Sayyiddah Zaidi, and my co-host, Eric Stoddart. Hi, Eric.
Hi, Zaidi. Good to see you again.
Lovely to be here with you. So today we're going to be exploring the topic of letting go. And that's quite an interesting one because there's been a number of different things that have been happening in my life that have required me letting go of some expectations that I have of myself. And the one that I'm going to begin with is my kind of hopes and desires for physical health. And we're in January, and that's the time and the month of health and fitness and all of these other kind of reflections that one has and New Year's resolutions. And I started skipping. Skipping for me is a wonderful all-round exercise. And what happened is that I think I pushed myself a little bit too far because I got this thing called plantar fasciitis. And I can see, Eric, from your face, you know what I'm talking about. And it's horrendous. And it kind of got to that point where I couldn't even put my weight on my foot. And the piece of letting go around that was the realization that I was no longer 20 and that I had to start taking care of myself in a different way. But alongside that piece of letting go was just this enormous appreciation about the gift of my body and what my body can actually do and how it functions and how God has blessed me. But it came through the realization that I couldn't walk, and that was quite difficult to take.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's the whole language of letting go, and because we use it, but we can let ourselves go, and we mean something really quite different about our physical condition. He or she's let themselves go is a pretty negative assessment of somebody, or if we say about ourselves. But then letting go of something is a much more positive thing, usually. And it's a step of growth and development. And that difference between letting yourself go and letting go really intrigues me. I sometimes use the sort of just comic aside that, I do have a six-pack. I've just lost this plastic thingy that keeps them all together. I can't remember who I'm stealing that from, but there's a letting go of, the dangers then of body shaming and getting into a whole discourse of what society expects and how we absorb what society expects. But maybe letting go of some of those societal expectations is a significant step along the way.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, that one, because, what was part of the reason for me starting this thing in health and fitness, and, I'm admittedly a little bit overweight, but actually that hasn't been a huge, it hasn't caused a huge amount of impact in my life. All the things that I've wanted to do, from wanting to run for a bus to, a couple of times I've done a half marathon, I've been able to do all of those things, So what is the expectation? And perhaps the question that I'm reflecting on now is, why was I pushing myself too far? What was it for? Is there something about wanting results really, really quickly? Because if we don't see them, then does it feel like it's effective? And
yeah, doing anything on a slow burn that doesn't show instant results, I find difficult, because you don't have the immediate marker points of change, and you have to invest thinking this is going to actually, in the long term, make a difference. So there's a sort of instant letting go of something and a radical new start. And that's maybe, those that sign up for the gym for the first time, and there's a sort of radicality of, right, I'm going to let go of that sense of myself who's just sitting around, and I'm going to sign up for the gym, and it peters out. the gyms must make a fortune out of all of us that have signed up and then don't continue. But then there's this more slow, long-term letting go that's just barely recognizable in terms of little steps along the way, but is maybe even more significant. I think that's certainly, if it's in terms of fitness, that seems to be the advice. Don't try huge, big changes, but just small incremental steps. And I suspect it's true of a lot of other areas of life. Yeah, there's a radicalness of sometimes you just need to stop doing something because it's really not good for you or for other people. But other times, just that step by step, letting go can be really significant.
Yeah, and as you're saying that, where that takes me is to prayer, and daily prayer or regular prayer, and how does one kind of have the engagement with that well, certainly that I expect of myself, for example, with my 5 daily prayers. How do I remain engaged with it, building my relationship with God, able to let go of some of the kind of dramas and the chaos of the outside world, so that I can have that kind of conversation with God in my prayer, but also knowing that the results are not in my hand. They are with God, and still showing up. And I think that's I want to say it's a challenge, but it's also a really quite amazing thing to be able to do. And because you're building a relationship with an entity that exists, but you've not seen. And how do you let go of what is going on in your mind and connect with what is happening either in your heart or in your emotions or at a soul level?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, letting go to be mentally in a place, to be attuned to God is a major task. I wonder what do you make of the idea of letting go of God? That I'm thinking here of spiritual traditions. There are those in my own traditions of Christianity that are really quite intense, and there's a huge pressure on the individual to maintain their relationship with God through particular rituals or through regular observance. And sometimes folks have talked of the release of letting go of God in that way. But is that just a bit too risky? What do you make of that idea of letting go of God?
Yeah, I mean, I think where I'm at in my life now, I would find that quite challenging, the idea of letting go of God.
Mm-hmm.
But then it's all to do with what is it that one does, and what's one's relationship with God like. And I'm a firm believer that everything that we do 24 hours a day, every action that we take, every thought, every intention, it can all be an act of worship.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that Islam teaches us quite clearly. Now, if I was thinking that I have to be conscious about what I'm doing in terms of my acts of worship can only be a list of prescribed things, I think I'd find that quite challenging. But at the same time, my interpretation of letting go when it comes to God would be knowing that God is always there, and that there's kind of like there's a time when I come closer and have a direct conversation with God, for example, in prayer. And there's other times when I'm just I'm doing stuff, but God's always in the background. Mm-hmm. And so I'm trying to use my words really, or choose my words really carefully, because I don't want to say that God's not there, because God is always there. Mm-hmm. But it's just about whether God's in your periphery or in the background as you're just kind of going about your day-to-day life. If I started to think that some of the things that I was doing as acts of worship, potential acts of worship, were becoming burdensome, I'd probably do a couple of things, things that I've done in the past. One is question myself and say, well, why am I doing it in the first place?
Mm-hmm.
And then two, kind of say, is there something that I could do instead? So, for example, in Islam, there's things that are set in stone that one has to do. The 5 pillars of Islam: prayer, fasting. The pilgrimage. Once you fit the kind of the means for it, and everything else is optional if you can do it. So the other side actually of this, and then I'll stop speaking for a second, is that what if it's within your means to be able to be very generous in terms of charity giving, or generous in terms of time, but you're not doing it? And if you're not doing those things, then rather than letting go of some of the wealth and the opportunities that God has given you, maybe you're hoarding it. Mm-hmm. So is that the opposite of letting go? It's like keeping something really tight.
Mm-hmm. I'm thinking back to a former type of Christianity that I was involved in, that was very much about freedom of not using set prayers, not using set formulae, and having a sense of spontaneity. That was what was considered to be the sort of apex of spirituality. And then when I left that and let go of that, I described it to some folks at the time of being freed from the tyranny of spontaneity. And that letting go of spontaneity seems a contradiction, but it was such a burden at that time, to have to be spontaneous in a spiritual sense, with prayers, with reading, with engagement with God, and to be freed of that, to let that go, was quite a significant step. And so I think I'm ambivalent about what to hold on to, what to let go, and what that actually means in terms of spiritual life. Because you're absolutely right with the hoarding. We can hold on to things and that we could give to other people, and we can just clasp those to ourselves when we could actually give out of that. I wonder if sometimes, even, I don't want to over spiritualize things, but sometimes we don't want to give of ourselves because we're not sure if that's going to be replenished. But often in the giving, we are replenished. And that seems, for me at least, there's a thread of that through Christian spirituality, that you may feel that you don't have anything to give, but give it away anyway. And in the act of giving it away, that is actually a replenishing act. I don't think it's a paradox. I think it's a little, I'm hesitant to use the word miracle, but there's a process there going on.
I really like the way that you've used the word replenished as well, because it might be easy to say the word receive, but replenished for me seems like it's a nourishing word, and it's one where, yes, of course, you're receiving something, but the receipt of that thing is not something tangible. Replenish kind of require you had the essence of it anyway, and it's just building up again. And I really like the way that you've used that word, and I agree completely. There's something that one does receive through the notion of giving, whatever it may be. And so when one kind of, actually what I really want to say here is when you stop thinking too much about letting go, then it takes all of this just to a place where you're not intellectualizing it and you're not questioning it, which makes it easier.
Yeah, because without trivializing that, I can draw a parallel that trying to do my 10,000 steps a day since Boxing Day, it's a lot easier when I don't think about it. It's just something I do. I don't decide, am I or am I not going to do it? I'm going to do it. And it's the decision making that is my downfall. If I think about it, I will probably find all sorts of reasons. It's something I need to do. It's too cold. It's too dark. It's too something or other. But if I don't think about it, I can do it. And I think maybe that's certain types of people that we are prone to overthink things, and therefore to let go of thinking, which again seems a bizarre way of talking, but just let go of thinking, let go of your mind and just do it. There's the wonderful phrase, I hope I can get it right, from Alice in Wonderland, where the white rabbit says to Alice, don't just do something, stand there. I thought that is brilliant as an insight. Just maybe don't think about it, just do it, or just don't do it. Just don't ponder something. But then in the world of activism, where you've always got to be doing something, the white rabbit saying, just don't do something, stand there, is deep, deep wisdom about human relationships, but it's also about what we're talking about of letting go of doing something.
And to me, isn't that the essence of practical theology? Because we're moving from the idea of doing and consistently doing to just being. And this piece that you're describing of just stand still, to me, within that is a lot of being. So how can we be who we really and truly are? And I'm going to say I don't think, which is really ironic, but I don't think that it comes from reflecting too much and being in your head. It comes from just allowing what's going to happen. And there's something really quite freeing in that. So going back to your thing of 10,000 steps, I mean, gosh, I can relate to that so much. But as you were speaking, it's also something about the 5 daily prayers. You know, if I have to be really conscious about doing it, it becomes harder work. And I don't mean that disrespectfully. It just means that it takes a huge amount of my psychological energy to focus on those things. But when I just kind of make it part of my day and it's integrated into it and it's natural, and even when the alarm goes off, it doesn't feel like a big kind of like shudder or an earthquake. It's like, I know I've got to do it. I've integrated it into my day and it's going to happen. And maybe there's something about that. Are we allowing things to naturally become part of how we spend our time, or are we spending too much time focusing in on one little thing?
Yeah, how much have we been shaped by our culture to be continually doing things in order to achieve certain things that we're told are important, whether it's a certain body shape or whether it's a certain level of fitness or financial achievement or professional reputation. So much of our society is shaping us into always wanting to do those things. Letting go of that, there are people who let go of those sorts of things and then they just really, the burden can then fall on other people. You know, the folks that in an employment situation don't take up the responsibilities because they're, I'm letting go. Well, if you let go, I got to pick up the mess. And that's not right. So that there's a balance to be got there about professional and family responsibilities and not abandoning people. But the letting go of how our society is shaping us into being creatures of achievement, which we measure, which comes to my stuff on surveillance and I carry a Apple Watch and I track my steps. That's how I know I've done my 10,000. So I know I'm doing it, but that whole technical ability we have now to measure everything that we're doing and almost a managerialist approach to our own lives. And I think, oh goodness, what's happened to us? Can we let go of that? Do we need to let go of that, but yet maintain our responsibilities to others? That's a tricky balance.
And also maintain our responsibilities to ourselves, because I am not a watch wearer, but when I started kind of the skipping and everything, I wore a smartwatch. And interestingly, when I got the plantar fasciitis, I took it off because I didn't need the data anymore, because I wasn't exercising, you know. And there's some, I think for me, when I had that data, there was something about self-responsibility, you know, and I was able to kind of like have a range of things and say, yeah, I'm doing okay, I'm making progress. When I don't have that data, it's like I do feel a little bit irresponsible, but there's nothing to measure. And once I start exercising again, once my foot gets better, then I need that data. Does that make sense? Because it enables me to stay within the range. Because the other thing that comes in for me is I know I can get addicted to these things in terms of exercise and stuff. So if I'm staying within a range, it's easier for me to let go. If I'm doing nothing or doing too much, it becomes a burden.
See, there's a fascinating perspective on gathering data so that you don't do too much, which is counterintuitive to a lot of culture. We would do that with machines. We'd want to measure the machine's performance so that it is not overstretched. But is that necessarily what we translate that into ourselves? Is there a pressure from society to use data to measure our achievement rather than to say that's enough? The equivalent is a diary. Is a diary to plot in all the things we have to do, or is a diary a way of saying now's the time to stop? Now, I'm nowhere near that in my head. My diary is all the things I need to do and carry forward the list of things I've not yet done, rather than this is to stop me, Eric, encroaching onto the rest of life. Now, that's an insight that is not worked its way through. I've not let go enough to do that. But just as you're talking there, it's a different perspective on diaries, data's achievement.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting. I mean, even just the other day, someone said to me, so what are you doing tomorrow? And I'm like, actually, I don't know what I'm doing tomorrow. Now, that doesn't mean that I'm irresponsible with my diary. It just means I use it. I'd like to think that I've got to a place where I use it so effectively as a tool that I don't need to know what I'm doing, because everything is laid out in there. All of my meetings have got the links or where I need to be and the travel time and all of that stuff. How do I do that? Every week I invest time to make sure that the following week is as tidy as it can be. And then I can let go completely. And that piece about encroaching into your family life and other things, actually, it's kind of like, I didn't realize how important that was until I started to have some meetings in the evenings, but do that more regularly than I wanted to. And I realized that I needed to look at it in a different way. So now, let's say I'm working from 12 in the afternoon till 9 p.m. It doesn't really matter if nobody else is in the house and if everyone else is working. But if there are other people, for me, it's kind of, how do I respect them as well, so that I make sure I stop at 5? And here we're now going into a whole series of other layers of relationships and things that then impact this piece of how do I let go of my own expectations of who I am, and at the same time fulfill my obligations in terms of my roles and responsibilities to others.
See, I sometimes like to use the biblical text, particularly the Gospels, to think imaginatively and try and fill some of the gaps. And I wonder, I doubt if Jesus ever had a diary. And he didn't have a car. So it doesn't seem that they made an awful lot of use of horses. So they were walking from place to place. So the focus in the Gospels tends to be on, well, they're going to tell the story of Jesus doing something. A long chapter in the Gospels about them doing nothing as they're walking from A to B it's not going to be something people read about. You write about the activity bits, but then the bits that aren't there are all the downtime, the walking, the meals that are not significant, the time of just being and being together. And that's lost because of the way the Gospels have been written, and quite appropriately so. But that wondering about the important religious figures, what was the gaps in between the things they were doing?
And that's such a brilliant question, and perhaps one that maybe we can come back to. Because the idea of gaps, I mean, where that's taking me right now is recently I've been trying to start meditating. And one of the lines that the meditation person was saying was, find the gaps between your thoughts. And I thought, gosh, I have no gaps. And I have to say, I felt like a complete failure.
Oh.
But I also realized that my thoughts all lead to each other. And because I keep pushing myself, and I'm clear that I want to find that still space that you described. You know? And every now and then a gap comes between my thoughts, and I feel like I've found gold. You know,
it is so difficult.
Yeah.
It seems to be a lot easier for certain personality types, but others of them, there are not gaps in between our thoughts, and we have to work hard. So it's another dimension of letting go of thinking. And that for me is certainly tough. But as we're talking, I think, goodness, that could be an interesting way to explore life. Stop thinking, or let go of thinking.
Yeah, and I know for me, letting go of thinking is really hard. But it can be done, you know, and very briefly, one of the things that I've started to do to let go of thinking is explore this whole notion of kind of like physical embodiment. You know, and perhaps God gave me the plantar fasciitis so that I would be thinking more about my body rather than what was inside my head for a few weeks, you know. I did think about that quite a lot.
Yeah, there's a lot to be said for thinking. But I do wonder if the art of letting go of thinking for some of us just might be the sort of art that we need to develop.
I think what this is, where kind of leading me to now, is there's quite a nice theme coming up for the next podcast that we do together, all about exploring. So, you know, how did the religious figures in our respective traditions reflect and think, and what can we take from the way that they did it and apply that to our lives today? So I think that might be quite an interesting conversation.
I'll look forward to that.
Thank you very much, Eric. This has just been a delight as always. And it's funny because I'm sitting here now thinking, so hard to let go of expectations and what you think will and won't come up, even in the conversations that we have together. And when we do let go, there's always so much richness that comes up, and the conversation kind of just meanders in a very, very natural way, as it has done today. So thank you again, Eric. Absolutely delighted to speak with you.
Pleasure, and it's been my joy to speak with you again.
Thank you. And to our listeners and those of you who are watching, please join us again for another conversation in practical theology very soon. Goodbye.
Goodbye.